All right, are we good?
You're good to go, Sarah. Thank you so much. So I will introduce you guys to Sarah. She is a graduate of the University of North Georgia. So she is well versed in our community, and she worked at North Georgia for some time in supplemental instruction and as an advisor to students. And then relatively recently, just really felt a calling, recognizing the disconnect between a college graduate and the workforce. And so made the move to Lanier Tech to be able to work with students who already have careers in mind. And so now she works at Lanier Technical College as a career services coordinator, and works with folks day in and day out who are looking to pursue a career at some level, whether that is a student that's still in college writing their first resume, or working with someone who's going through a certification program or adult education program. So she is a great resource for us today. I'm excited to have her on the line. And so Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Laura. So yes, my name's Sarah Jolly. I'm the Career Services Coordinator here at Lanier Technical College. I do work with students from start to finish in terms of choosing a program of study all the way to finding a job after graduation. And today we're going to be talking about resumes. So I'll go ahead and get started with that. I like to start out kind of going over what a qualifications and experience. And I think we all understand that, but the important part that I think sometimes we overlook is it's an advertisement for you. It is the first thing that an employer is going to see that exhibits who you are and what you're capable of. And employers want to meet you on paper before they invest time in an interview, because when we're working, time is money, right? Many of us get paid hourly. So, you know, if we're going to invest 30 minutes to an hour in meeting somebody, we want to make sure it's worth our time. Without a resume, you can't even begin to compete, and an inferior resume will quickly eliminate you before you even have a fighting chance. And that's true. Again, they're looking at your resume before they even meet you. So we want to make sure that this document is perfect from top to bottom. Whoop. There we go. So some shocking statistics I like to go over. The average time a recruiter is going to spend looking at your resume is about 6 seconds. That long. So if you're gleaning over a document in about 6 seconds, what kinds of things would you all notice? If you pick up a book or a document and you have 6 seconds to look at it, what would you be looking for? Feel free to chime in.
Location, experience, and keywords.
Like oh, go ahead, Joel.
Location, experience, keywords.
Yeah, keywords is going to be a big one. Location is important because are you going to have to relocate? Are you within a reasonable driving distance of the job? Something else, if you've been doing it a while, like I have, if you didn't write the document, a lot of times it's really easy to pick out mistakes. So I'm going to harp a lot on getting your document proofread by somebody other than yourself, because a lot of times when we're writing, we know what we're trying to say, and our mind just kind of skips over the mistakes that might be there. So, but a lot of times that's the first thing somebody else is going to pick up on. So it's really important that we don't have any little mistakes in there that we just didn't notice. 76% of resumes are discarded due to use of an unprofessional email address. So I know you guys have seen them. Somebody give me an example of an unprofessional email address.
I love Coca-Cola 45 at yahoo.com.
There you go. So sometimes they're cute. Like I've seen, you know, mom to two monkeys. And it's cute, it's not offensive, but it's not unprofessional, or it's not professional either. So If your email isn't something very simple like first name, period, last name, first initial, last name, something like that, there are tons of free email tools that you can use. Gmail is free, Yahoo. I don't even know if Hotmail still exists. Everything goes so fast nowadays, but you can get a free email address, and I would highly recommend creating one for professional use. That also is going to help you manage any job offers that may come through there, or following your job search. 68% of employers are going to search you on Facebook and social media. So if you have Facebook, LinkedIn, I know Snapchat's a big one nowadays, and I don't ever tell anybody, don't delete your profiles. Just be aware of what is public on your profiles. And that includes anything you've been tagged in. I'm assuming we're all adults, right? Maybe it's somebody on a beach. I'm sure you guys heard about the teacher who was fired because she was tagged in a photo of her holding an adult beverage on her beach vacation, and it was public on her profile, and they said it was unprofessional. So little things like that, just kind of call through your social media before you start that job search and make sure everything on there is professional looking. The average number of people who apply for any given job is around 118, and I would say that number has gone up substantially since the pandemic. So now we're going to be looking at probably around 300 applicants for any given job. And what this means for you is, that 6 seconds of time that a recruiter is going to be looking at a resume may even go down at this point, because they're just trying to get through them as quickly as possible, and they're wanting to cut out anything little that they can find to cut you out. I mean, it's a process of elimination as opposed to, I'm looking for the best right off the bat. They're just looking to cut the fat. 58% of hiring managers say they've caught a lie on a resume. So, again, a resume being an advertisement for you, we want to, even if it was changing a light bulb, we're going to say it in the most sophisticated way possible, because we want them to be paying attention and think we're awesome and we're fantastic. But it's never worth lying about. You don't want to get a job where you don't actually have the experience to do the job. It puts you in a bad position, and it puts the employer in a bad position. So don't lie on your resume. So there's a couple different styles of resumes that we can look at. The most recognized and I guess acceptable from an employer standpoint is going to be chronological. This type of resume is going to simply list your professional experience from the most recent to the least recent. So you'll start out with the last job you had or your current position and work backwards from there. A functional resume is for, as I said, I'm at Lanier Tech, so a lot of times I'm working with students that may not have any work experience at all. So we're concentrating on their skills that they gain through school and what they can bring to an employer that way. And then you also have a combination resume. So maybe you've had jobs that aren't necessarily in the job market you're looking to get into, and you've gone back to school, and so we have to kind of combine the skills and the experience. But again, chronological is going to be the most widely recognized and accepted format for your resume. Do you all have any questions on that?
Sarah, I think that I was going to let everyone know, just again for some of our folks that joined us after we kicked off, please feel free to send your questions through the chat feature, and you can do that to the group, or you can do that directly to me. My name is Laura Stewart, and I'm the Vice President of Community Engagement at the Forsyth County Chamber. But as Sarah has mentioned, she is also accepting questions for folks who just want to share over the mic. So either way to submit your questions, please feel free to do that. The chat feature can be found up in the top right-hand corner of your screen. That's also a place where you could share your answers, as Sarah kind of asks for feedback from anyone. And Sarah, one quick question, and you kind of touched on this, but how would you advise folks to determine which of these formats is the right style for a position that they're applying for?
So as I said, with a functional resume and you're concentrating only on skills, you're not bringing any work experience to the table. So if you're entry level, if you've never held a job, then of course that's going to be the style we're looking at. If you have lots of work experience, we're going to focus on a chronological. And I would say, honestly, I kind of stay away from combination resumes to a degree. Because what we really want to do is make all of your job experience as unrelated as it may seem when you first take a glance at it. For instance, with nursing students, oftentimes they recently graduated high school, so they may have worked as waitresses or in retail. What we want to look at is making the soft skills that they gain through those positions relevant to the jobs that they're trying to do. So if you're getting into a nursing position, we want to focus on those communication skills, those conflict resolution skills. So I'm always kind of pushing towards getting a chronological resume. Again, especially with the job market being flooded right now and the hiring managers really, looking for reasons to discard resumes, focusing on chronological is ideal. And making all the skills and experience that you have relevant to what you're trying to do.
And Sarah, we had a follow-up question come in on that. In a chronological resume, how would you advise folks to address a gap in employment?
Okay. So, and that one comes up a lot. So sometimes if it's a gap in employment, say for parenting, for, stay-at-home mom or something, we may actually list that as a job. But, there's no way to kind of cover it up because it's there, right? And so in some regards, we're kind of depending on hiring managers to be understanding people and give you that opportunity to explain. I think right now with COVID and everything kind of shutting down and a lot of, unfortunately that a lot of businesses haven't survived this economic downturn, that, we're going to see a lot more employment gaps and a lot more understanding coming from HR. So there's really no way to exclude the gap, but I wouldn't highlight the gap either. So you don't want a place in there that says from this time to this time I was not employed, but you're just going to move on to the next employment. Another place that you might address it is in your cover letter. So if you're applying to a job and you submit your resume and you know that you have a gap, it may be appropriate to mention it in your cover letter, or give some explanation for that in the cover letter. So that way you kind of addressed that elephant in the room right off the bat.
That's great, Sarah.
All right. So when making a resume, if you're starting from scratch, I generally like to work with students on getting just a rough outline first. So we're not focusing on being perfect or everything being worded perfectly in resume speak. I want to get the information on paper. So, your header, if you have an objective statement, you can include that, but of course your education, getting that experience listed in order, and then any skills, activities, honors, awards, anything. So the outline should include absolutely everything you could think you'd ever want to put on your resume. I actually like to keep kind of what I call a master resume, which is more like a CV where it's an overload of information. And that way, when you're applying to jobs with your resume, you can kind of pick and choose what information is going to be most relevant for that job. So if you're starting from scratch, like I said, I'd go ahead and make that outline, that you're not worried about if it's pretty, if it looks good, if it sounds good. You're just getting that information on paper so that you can work with it from there. So of course your header, you're going to be starting with your name. Your name, in my personal opinion, should be the largest, boldest text on your entire resume. If I'm picking up this document and I am interested, I want to very easily look up and know who it was that I was interested in learning more about. you want to include your present address. Now, some people seem opposed to putting their address on there. An employer kind of, like I said, they may want to know, are you going to have to relocate, or what is the drive going to be for you to the employment address? And if you get a job there, you're going to have to give them your address anyway. So I really see no reason to not put it on there. And if you don't put it on there, it kind of leaves the question, why not? Again, you want to include your email address and your phone number to make sure that they can contact you and make sure that email address is professional. And if you have a LinkedIn profile, you can include that on your resume in your header. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile and you're using a template, so Word has a lot of really great resume templates, and a lot of times it'll include a section for your LinkedIn URL. Make sure you delete that. So you don't want the empty area where you would include your LinkedIn profile to still show up on the resume. It needs to go away. The other thing I would say about a header is a lot of times, well, all the time in Word, if you're doing it from a template or you open up a blank document, you're going to be in the body section of the document on Word. Your header needs to go in the header section. So what I mean by that is that top like half inch of the page. If you double click there, it's going to automatically open the header. So you can either, if you're using a template, you can copy paste this header information into that top header section, or of course you can type it out yourself and format it pretty yourself. But the reason you want it in that header section is because if your resume is 2 pages, you want the header to carry over to each additional page. You want the same header and font to be used in your cover letter, in your references document, and any other documents that you're submitting. You want that header and those fonts to match. And the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and put it in the header section. So an objective statement is something that, again, resumes tend to be this gray area where we've got all these different opinions and viewpoints on what should be done on a resume. And I'm a member of a lot of communities on LinkedIn with other career services and HR personnel, and it's like a constant battle. So it's really interesting to watch. There are no really hard, fast rules on it. So an objective statement is one of those things where some people are like, yes, I want to see it. And some people say, no, I don't want to see it. Usually we see objective statements with people that have less experience in where they're trying to go. So again, entry level students, that objective statement is just a little blurb for them to kind of summarize what they're bringing to the table. The important thing is if you're going to use an objective statement, we want to stay away from to obtain or, you know, to get a job doing XYZ, to get this. We want to stay away from the me-focused statement that says, this is what I'm looking for. And what you want to put there is, this is what I am bringing to the table as an employee. So, you know, yes, you can put the position that you're interested in, but you need to put, you know, the key skills that are qualifying you for that position and your added benefit or value for the employer. So again, stay away from the me-focused statement and stick with an employer-focused statement that says, I'm fantastic because I'm going to bring all of this to you. And again, feel free to interrupt me if you all have any questions. So this is just an example. You can see my name is the largest part in that header area. Address, phone number, email, and then there's a LinkedIn URL there. And the objective here is for my current job, so to assist students in major selection and career development while improving community business relationships and to provide quality external opportunities for students and alumni. So you can see there, that is an employer-focused statement saying what I hope to bring to Lanier Tech and to the students as opposed to what I want to get from Lanier Tech, which is essentially what we all want, right? We want job security, we want paychecks, we want benefits, we want a team that includes us and helps us grow. So again, it should be about what you're going to bring to the table. So again, I'm usually working with students, whether they are brand new students fresh out of high school or they're students that have gone to school, had careers, and they've decided to make a change. So if either of those are true for you or might be in the future, if you're making a change to a new industry, I would always advise you to bring your education to the top, because that's going to be that highlight that says, I may not have the experience in the exact area that I'm looking to get a job in, but I do have the skills. I have the education. I have what it takes to work here. So I'm always advising students to include their education first. Now, if you got your education 10 years ago and you've been in the industry for 10 years, then your education can certainly go at the bottom of your resume. You want to highlight your skills and your experience over your education. So, you know, that's just a placement thing. But when you do include your education, which if you have any you want to include, right, all except for high school. So once you're in the working world, once you've gotten any college experience, we're no longer counting high school. If you include high school, it's going to date you. Generally, we all graduate high school around the same age. So at that point, we can make an assumption on how old you are. We don't want to open ourselves up to those biases. So we're going to skip high school and go right for any college education. You want to make sure you're including the name of the program. So if it was a business management degree or if it was a certificate, we want to know what program you actually got a degree or a certificate in. The name of the institution that you graduated from, the date or expected date of your graduation. So again, if any of you are considering, you know, coming back to school and learning a new trade, but you need to work while you're doing that, and you haven't graduated yet, you would include the expected date of your graduation. If your GPA while you were in school was above a 3.0, you want to include that. That says, hey, I was an AB student all throughout school, and that's a great achievement. So you definitely want to include that on there. And if you have any significant achievements, if you graduated with honors, if you're a member of an honors society, you can absolutely include that under education. Of course, if you choose to add an achievements or an activity section at the bottom of your resume, you could include it there. Some of that is just about preference or where it fits the best or how much description is needed for whatever it is. A word of caution there, if you were a member of any societies like fraternities or sororities, make sure that you spell out what the organization is. So using abbreviations gets very complicated for people outside of those organizations because they don't necessarily know what you're referencing. We can usually tell by the actual title if it's spelled out, but if it's just an abbreviation, it becomes very convoluted.
Sarah?
So here are just a couple of examples. And Laura, so the video on my side is covering my PowerPoint. Is it doing that on your end?
No, your PowerPoint still looks good.
Okay.
I will let you know we've had a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
So before we got to kind of on down to another topic, I wanted to be sure we addressed these. So we did have a question. We have someone on the call who has 40 years of experience, and they were curious about your recommendation of how far back do they need to go with listing their experience?
So typically it's 10 years is the recommendation. And again, some of these things kind of come down to space. So, 40 years, if in those 40 years you held only 2 jobs, say you worked one for 20 and another for 20, then you have the space to include your entire 40 years of experience. But in those 40 years, if you had a new job every 5 years, then we're looking at, job descriptions for, I'm not very good at math, help me out here, for, 10 jobs at that point. And you may not have the space to include all of that. So some of it comes down to space and making those determinations on how far back you want to go. But generally, it's recommended about 10 years.
And then Sarah, another question, but in kind of the similar realm, what about including additional certifications that were post, degree program?
Absolutely, and you can include those. Again, depending on how your resume is formatted, You can include them under education. So that listing may look like the year you got the certification, what the certification was, and who the certifying body was. Again, be wary of using abbreviations because even within industries, HR personnel doesn't necessarily have experience in that field. So they may not be familiar with the abbreviations. But again, you can include those under the education heading. If you have a lot of them, you may want to create another heading that says certifications and put them there. So, but I, absolutely include certifications that you have.
And then last question that we've gotten here recently, a question about moving from resumes to cover letters, but kind of the question of how necessary is a cover letter?
So a cover letter, the general rule of thumb is if they don't ask for one, you don't have to include one. Exception to that being if it is somebody that you were referred to personally. So a friend of a friend maybe told you about the job and you've decided to apply. Even if they don't ask for a cover letter, it's usually appropriate to put one in there because you can say, hey, so-and-so said, this would be a great opportunity and thought I'd be a great fit. It's kind of a great way to, capitalize on that networking piece. If they ask for a cover letter, you have to include a cover letter. So if you're not including the documents that they've requested from you, from a hiring standpoint, if you're a manager and right off the bat, you're not including the documents that I've asked from you, then it's reflecting, in a stranger's eyes, what kind of work ethic are you going to bring to the table? If you just don't want to do it, are you going to do it when it's the job? So if they ask for a cover letter, always include it. If they don't ask for a cover letter, you don't have to include it. The exception being if you were referred to this person or networked with this person somehow, then it would be appropriate to include it anyway.
Thanks, Sarah. So those are kind of the questions that I have collected thus far. If anyone has any questions, this is a great midway point to ask those. You can also, as a reminder, put those into the chat. Some of you are obviously using that, and that's great. That chat feature is in the top right-hand corner of your screen. If there's not any questions at this point, Sarah, I will let you move forward in the presentation.
All right, thank you. So here you can see just a couple examples of what your education may look like. You can see they're both formatted differently, but they include the same information. And the top one even goes further in including some skills that the student may have gotten while they were in the program. So then we get into experience. So again, depending on when your education was, you may be in experience first and education last, but experience is the one that I think we all struggle with the most because it's a lot of information to go through. It becomes hard to figure out what you want to include under those headings. So with experience, we want to include full and part-time jobs. If you were self-employed, you can include volunteer work, believe it or not. So if you volunteered somewhere for a long period of time, so not necessarily doing one volunteer activity on a Saturday because your children's school asked you to, but if you consistently volunteered for Meals on Wheels or the Humane Society or something like that, you can absolutely include that. Volunteer work is still experience. And if anything, it shows that you've gone above and beyond. You didn't have to be paid for the service. You care about your community. So I am a huge advocate for volunteer work and for including it in your experience. Of course, again, I'm always working with students, so I don't want to pass by the students. If you've had internships, practicums, or field experiences, those can all be included in your experience as well. So very similarly to your education, you need that header that kind of describes what we're looking at here. So you want your job title, the name of the company that the job was with, the dates of your employment. Now this is different from your education. Like I said, with education, we're just looking for the date of graduation. We don't need to know when you started or that it took you 10 years to get your degree. We only need to know when you graduated. With your work experience, we want to know the month and the year that you started employment to the month and the year that you ended that employment. And then you can include the city and state as well, especially if it's a nationwide company. And so once you've got that kind of employment header listed out, you're going to get into your responsibilities or your job duties. At this point, I have seen resumes that are written out almost in sentence format. So it's just, I did this, comma, this, comma, this. I would recommend going with bullet points for your experience. It makes it much easier for an HR person to pick out, as we talked about at the beginning, keywords that they may be looking for, since every bullet point should be starting with an action verb. So created, communicated, managed, they should all start with action verbs. And when you put it in that bullet point format, we can quickly pick out those action verbs, which are in general, if you're looking for keywords, they're going to be those action verbs. So like I said, bullet points, you want to start each one of them with the action verb. Present tense if you're currently employed there, past tense if it was previous employment. Try to vary the verbs. I know a lot of times in work, I could list out 6 bullet points that all start with the word communicate, because that is a huge portion of my job. But I want to vary those verbs as much as possible. So I may say communicate, and then I may say collaborate to kind of get a difference there. Something that I would recommend doing, I actually have a list that I will more than happily share with you, Laura, so that you could send to the participants. But you can even Google search verb lists for resumes, and it will pull up, the enormity of lists that are available out there is overwhelming. When you are talking about your job descriptions, I would recommend, if you have any statistics, so numbers, measurable outcomes of what you've done, absolutely include those. What we're looking for in your job description is for you to prove your skills. So not to say, if I say to you, I have leadership qualities, right? That doesn't mean anything. You don't know me, and I haven't said anything that proves that I actually have these qualities. So what we're looking for is, how can we prove, if I say I'm a great salesperson, how can I prove that in my resume? Well, I can prove that with measurable outcomes by saying, increase sales 10% for the fiscal year 2019, 2020, as measured by, our annual sales report. So if you have any statistics like that, absolutely include them. If you can focus on, again, those measurable outcomes, then that's the best way to do it. But again, you're looking to tailor your skills and experience to whatever position you're applying for. So when I'm working with somebody on their resume, a lot of times I'll say, do you have any jobs that you're currently interested in that we can look at, or can we look at jobs that you're interested in before we really get into the nitty-gritty of the resume? Because what I want to do is, if you look at a job description, it's going to look almost like a mirror image of a resume, right? Because they're listing out the duties they want you to fulfill. So if, something simple like waitressing, I want you to communicate with customers. I want you to memorize orders. I want you to operate a cash register. Well, then I've just seen all the keywords, right? I have to communicate. I have to memorize. I have to operate. I have to be able to count money. So I can pick that stuff out, and then I can come over to my resume and say, well, I was a babysitter before. So, I had to make sure I was monitoring my hours and my schedule for who I was babysitting for. I had to communicate with parents and with children. And I had to memorize, who didn't like broccoli or who was allergic to peanut butter. So, again, sometimes they seem like they're worlds apart, but a lot of times if we can kind of get that idea from the job description of what they're looking for, it's easier then to look back at our resume and say, okay, I can relate this job to what they want me to do. So that's the biggest thing that I focus on when I'm looking through a job descriptions on a resume is making sure that we're really being relevant to the jobs that we're looking for. You want to be concise in this area, so we're not overly wordy. We're not going to use I, me, my. We're not typing out exactly, I went to work every day. Like we're cutting right to the chase. Arrived at 10 till daily, which hopefully we won't even be talking about when we arrived at work, but you get the gist. Like I said, it's operated cash register as opposed to I frequently operated the cash register. So we're cutting out a lot of unnecessary words in resume writing. So here you can see an example of what a typical job experience may look like. Customer service representative would be the job title, great business would be the company that it was with, and then the dates that it occurred. And you can see every one of those bullet points starts with an action verb, assist, create. And I've even combined two, input and evaluate. So you can do that as well to keep those bullet points from taking up an entire page. Where can you combine things and kind of squish that data down together? Initiate, and then you can see that there are some numbers in there. There's some percentages, and those kind of draw your eye too, because in an area where you're seeing a ton of words, where you see numbers, you're like, oh, let me pay attention. What is this? So any questions about that, or any new questions pop in, Laura?
So
Yes.
we had one question that is not directly related to this, but I think it is a good one that others may have, so certainly want to share it. Someone said, you mentioned CV. What is the difference between CV and a resume?
So a CV is curricula vitae. I don't know. It's Latin. I could be totally wrong there, but CV is very extensive. It's typically used in higher education. That's why I'm sort of familiar with it, but generally by faculty members. And a CV can take up, it can basically be a small novel because it goes into such great detail and such length of what you've done. They can go over education plans, but it's a very, very in-depth document, whereas a resume, we're looking for like a very brief summary of, as you said, somebody with 40 years of experience, we're still looking for 2 pages or less for them to break down their lifetime of skills. So the resume being a brief summary and a CV being a limitless explanation of everything that you've done. You're generally not going to see a CV request, again, unless you're in higher education. That's the only time I've ever seen a CV request. And then I think there was another question.
Yes, I have a question.
Go for it.
So I've taken several different courses, got lots of good information. As I think you mentioned before, some of it is competing, right? Some of it, different people have different perspectives. Here's my question with regards specifically to the experience portion of the resume. I've been told by recruiters that less is more, use statistics, but use less words. The more white space, the better, the more effective your words can be, the better. And I've also been in webinars where other professionals have advised to be wordy and to use those keywords as much as you possibly can, so that the ATS catches all those keywords to qualify you for the job application. So that being said, can you talk me through a little bit of what the lifespan is of a job application, specifically electronically via LinkedIn? how long does it take before that actually hits human eyes? I think that both pieces of advice I got, although they're conflicting, really speak to who's seeing the resume first. Is it a goal via an electronic submission like LinkedIn to just kill it with keywords so that the ATS captures you and sets you apart, and then the recruiter steps in and begins to look at it? Or are we simply applying, hoping that a person with two eyes and a brain is going to look at that application and that resume right off the bat?
Yeah, so some of this is going to come down to company size. If you are applying for like a small business, most likely you're going to go directly, like if somebody gives you an email to apply, most likely in those circumstances, it's going to go directly into the hands of a person. Now, with a larger company, like, again, we do nursing here, so we've got the big Northeast Georgia Medical Center. That company, you have to go online, you have to fill out an application, and you have to submit your resume. So in that instance, you can be certain that your resume is not getting into the hands of a human being until it passes all these rigors ahead of time. To touch on that, ATS, so applicant tracking system, is utilized by a lot of companies. And what it is a software program that they basically put in, like you said, keywords that say, and I'm explaining this for anybody that's not familiar with ATS. They put in keywords that say, this is what we're looking for from an applicant, and they have to meet, and they can set different standards on this, but let's just say they say it has to meet 80% of the keywords that we've included in the job description. So, and let me just forward here on my PowerPoint because I did include it. Yeah. So one thing that you can do, I wouldn't say be overly wordy. You do want to keep it minimal, as minimalistic as possible, because once you do get into the hands of a human being, like I said, they're giving you 6 to 10 seconds to decide if they even want to read more. So they need to be able to pick that stuff up quickly as well. But as far as getting through ATS in order to get into the hands of that human being, you do want to pay attention to those keywords. So one thing you can do is I've included a link here, and Laura, I don't know if you can copy paste that into the chat box for them.
Yeah, sure.
But it's wordcounter.net. And if you go there and you copy paste the job description that you're looking at into the box and hit enter, on the right hand side, there's going to be a keyword density counter. And so that's going to tell you what words are popping up multiple times in that job description and give you a better idea of what the keywords you may want to include in your resume are. So, you know, again, it's one of those things, can you factually include it without stretching the truth so much that it could be considered lying? But, you know, going back to my previous point, you know, the whole goal, regardless of keywords, is to be relevant to the job you're applying to. So keyword comes into play simply because you're trying to be relevant to the job you're applying to. So that doesn't mean get overly wordy with your resume so you can randomly throw a keyword in at the end of a bullet point. But if you can include it, and if you know, again, use that word counter and see what those keywords are and how do they relate to your previous experience, you know, absolutely include it. And again, you're not looking for 100% here. Most of the time, these ATS systems are set up for, you know, 80% keyword, because nobody's going to have 100%. And the goal there, again, is to get through that ATS system into the hands of an actual person. In terms of timeline, what that takes, it really just depends on the company, on their manpower available, you know, how big is their HR department, how many applicants they're getting. So right now, again, with the economic situation that we're in, it's probably going to take longer for you to get a response. So that being said, I would not sit around waiting for responses. I would continue searching in the meantime and applying in the meantime, and you know, tweaking that resume every time I'm applying to a job. So, and something else I've noted on here, as I said, focusing on outcomes and measurable things. This actually came from Google. It's something they look for is the XYZ formula. So this is really good, I feel like, for people that are, higher up in, management and above. Accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z is a good formula. Again, if you're trying to show statistics, if you're trying to show outcomes, it's a good formula. That being said, that formula can kind of hold you back from that keyword density, right? If we're just saying I accomplished this by measuring this, by doing this, that end piece is where your keyword's going to come into play. So yeah, you're right. It's a huge gray area. Some of it's figuring out really what works best for you, for the experience that you've had, for how much experience, how much you need to include in that 2 pages that you have for a resume. Resumes is interesting because a lot of times I feel like I don't have a solid answer for you. I have a kind of, here's some recommendations and let's see what works on your resume specifically.
No, it's good advice. I mean, it's basically do both, right? Be concise and but don't be overly wordy, but focus on keywords. And I mean, the end of it is that I think most every resume is going to go through some sort of ATS before somebody actually looks at it. So it's good, point taken and good advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, I had a question come in on those kind of measurable outcomes that we were discussing. The question is, how do you handle keeping company information like numbers and accomplishments confidential if you signed a confidentiality agreement?
That's a good one. I mean, in general, I would say, so again, working in higher ed, I am bound by FERPA laws. So federal laws saying I can't disclose student information. So the first thing I would say is, what does that confidentiality agreement cover? Because they can't tell you that you can't tell people I did my job. At that point, you're saying you can't even write a job description about what you did because company information is confidential. So I would look and investigate further as to what they're saying you are not free to share. Because what we're looking for here, if you increase sales revenue, that you're not disclosing anything about the company, you're only disclosing that you increased sales revenue. So, that again, that's something that I would investigate further in terms of what are you bound by in terms of confidentiality that you cannot disclose, and what, how could you maybe word things that you're not disclosing information. So for instance, I cannot give out student information, but I can say I had a student who was in XYZ program and had this issue. I'm not disclosing their information. Does that make sense? So kind of skirting around the issue, I guess would be the right way to say that. But yeah, I would look at your contract, see what you're bound to not disclose, and then see, how else could you word it that you're not actually disclosing company information, but only your accomplishments in the company.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you get through education, experience, the things that we have to see on your resume. Maybe you've got a little extra space, or maybe you've done some things that you're really, really proud of. So you may want, or again, certifications like we talked about. Maybe you want a section on certifications. So you're not bound in this last portion by any specific thing. If it's activities, if it's honors and awards, if it's accomplishments, if it's certificates, you can include another section on your resume if those pieces didn't fit in very well anywhere else on your resume. You want to sort these again by the most recent date, starting with the most recent to the least recent. This may be somewhere you want to put volunteering. So say you were working, but you also volunteered on the weekends. You may want to include that here. Depending on space, you'll utilize the ones that were most important to your career objective. So if you don't have a lot of space, it's not a necessary section is what I'm saying. Again, don't abbreviate if it's an organization. So I used to work at the Humane Society of Northeast Georgia, so HSNEGA. But if I just say that to you, you have no idea what I just said to you unless I spell it out. So make sure you're spelling those things out. If you've held any leadership roles, so, if you're on a board or you're the leader of, you could be a volunteer leader. Make sure you emphasize that, because again, it's one thing to say, I have leadership skills. And it's another thing to be able to prove it by saying, I held a leadership role, I increased our membership, things like that. The thing I will say is make sure that these are related professionally to what you're trying to do. So a mistake I see sometimes is, activities. I like hiking and I like biking and I like rock climbing. And those are great things. And, we're happy to know people personally, but that's not what we're looking for on the resume. So keep it professional. Which is ironic because I put the Dungeons and Dragons thing on there, which is probably not professional, but I like to keep it light when I'm presenting, so don't take that to heart.
We noted SpongeBob on the previous slide.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm working with students, and a lot of times we have dual enrollment, and I'm trying to stay relevant a little bit here. So, but here are some examples and, goal. So you guys probably aren't familiar with goal. So that just shows, that I have to spell that out so that somebody knows what I'm talking about, which is the Georgia Occupational Award of Leadership. Wow, right? But if you don't know that that's what that stands for, you'll be like, goal, student of the year. I don't know what that means. But there's just a couple examples of things that people could include. So once you get all of that information put together for yourself, and maybe you've already put it in a template, but realize that you're at 3 pages or, it's just not, it doesn't look really good. So, this is where we want to go back and edit for the looks part of it, and get into the formatting. So you do want a lot of white spaces. I don't know your name, I'm sorry, but you do want a white space on your resume. You don't want it to be words from one side to the other. So, make sure your margins are reasonable. It doesn't have to completely be 1 inch. I have cut margins down a little bit on a resume just to provide some extra room, depending on the information. With the exception of like your name and your section headings, in the body font, so your job descriptions, your education description. I was just wrapping up with some formatting things as far as, beware of boxes, text boxes on your resume. ATS can't read those. But that's really it. Formatting is just all about playing with it to make sure that everything fits. So whether it's increasing fonts or spacing or decreasing. A final word on that. If you have a one-page resume, that's fine. If you have a 2-page resume, that's fine. The biggest thing there is don't have a 1.5-page resume. So either fit it all into 1 page or make it take up 2 pages. And if you're printing that thing out and sending it to somebody, don't do front and back. This should be 2 separate front-sided print only and not stapled together. Again, when you get into cover letters and things like that, they should all match. References upon request is a very outdated thing. You don't need to include that anymore as well. So I think that kind of covers up that last little bit there. So, yeah. I'm sorry for the technical hiccup.
Well, and hey, just for the group, and thanks for those that have hung with us. This is probably not, I mean, most of you look like pros. This is probably not your first virtual meeting. And really, if truth be told, we would love to be doing this in person and really be able to engage and interact with one another. But certainly with the times, this is the best approach for us to provide this information. And like I said at the beginning, the Chamber is really working to connect with our partners that can help in these areas, because we know that it is a trying time. And certainly for those that have been surprised by a career change that they maybe did not plan back in January of this year. So as I was mentioning, Sarah has been so gracious to put together several of these webinars. So we have some coming up in the next few weeks at this same time slot, and we'll be sending out information on those. Hopefully we have your contact information already. Those can also all be found on the Forsyth County Chamber's event calendar on our website. And Sarah's going to be covering a couple of topics, and we may even do some more resume building workshops as well, as we know a lot of folks will be here back in the job market in the next few months. So anyway, again, thank you all so much for today. I appreciate the interaction. I know Sarah does too. I appreciate those of you coming to the mic with me when we were out for a bit. But Sarah, we look forward to talking with you on some other topics, all surrounding employment and how to kind of add to your skill set in these days. And just hope that everyone has a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.